The rain fell in gentle sheets across the Boston skyline, washing the city in a soft gray haze that blurred the edges of buildings and turned the streets into mirrors reflecting the cloudy sky above. Inside Children's Hospital, 12-year-old Ellie Matthews stared out the window of her room, watching droplets race down the glass, her thin fingers tracing their paths as if trying to guide them home. Her once vibrant auburn hair had thinned considerably over months of treatment, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, but there was still a spark of determination in her gaze that refused to dim. "Which one will win?" asked a soft voice from the doorway. Ellie turned, surprised to find a tall figure standing there, a man with shoulder-length dark hair and a scruffy beard, dressed in simple jeans and a worn black jacket. Something about him seemed familiar, but in her medication haze, she couldn't quite place him. "The one on the left," she said, pointing to a particularly fast droplet. "It's found the quickest path." The man smiled and moved closer, his movements measured and gentle, as if afraid to disturb the quiet of the room. "Smart thinking. Always look for the path of least resistance, right?" There was something calming about his presence, something that made Ellie feel instantly at ease despite not knowing who he was. Perhaps it was the kindness in his eyes or the way he spoke to her, not with the pitying tone of most adults who visited the pediatric oncology ward, but with genuine interest, as if her opinions on raindrops mattered. "Are you a new doctor?" she asked, studying him more closely. He chuckled softly. "No, not a doctor. Just a visitor. My name is Keanu." Ellie's eyes widened slightly. Now she recognized him. "Like Keanu Reeves? The actor?" "Exactly like him," he replied with a small smile, sitting down in the chair beside her bed. "And you are?" "Ellie. Ellie Matthews. I'm 12 3/4. She sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. "You're Neo. And John Wick." "Among other people, yes," Keanu nodded. "But today I'm just Keanu, visiting some very brave kids." "I hear you're one of the bravest." Ellie shrugged, looking down at her blanket. "That's what everyone says, but I don't feel brave. I just do what the doctors tell me and hope it works this time." "This time?" Keanu asked gently. "Third round of treatment," she said, gesturing to the 4 stand beside her bed. "The cancer came back twice already. Mom says third time's a charm, but..." Her voice trailed off, her gaze returning to the rain outside. Keanu was quiet for a moment, respecting the weight of her words. "You know," he finally said, "I think bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about facing each day even when you're scared." They talked for nearly an hour, about movies and books and Ellie's dream of becoming a marine biologist someday. Keanu listened intently to every word, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories from film sets that made her laugh despite her fatigue. Before leaving, he promised to return the following day with a surprise. True to his word, Keanu appeared the next morning with a worn copy of The Little Prince tucked under his arm. "This was my favorite book when I was about your age," he explained, handing it to Ellie. "I thought maybe we could read it together." And so began a ritual. Each day for a week, Keanu would arrive at the hospital, slip quietly into Ellie's room, and read to her. Sometimes other children from the ward would join them, sitting cross-legged on the floor or perched on the edges of chairs, listening to the story of a little prince from a distant asteroid and his adventures across the universe. The hospital staff watched with amazement as one of Hollywood's biggest stars devoted hours of his time to reading to children, never allowing photographs, never alerting the media, simply being present with kids who needed an escape from their daily battles. On the 7th day, Keanu arrived to find Dr. Rivera, Ellie's oncologist, outside her room. The doctor's expression was grave. "Mr. Reeves, could I speak with you a moment?" Stepping aside, Dr. Rivera explained that Ellie's latest test results weren't promising. The treatment wasn't working as hoped, and they were running out of options. She had perhaps a few months, maybe less. "She doesn't know yet," the doctor said quietly. "We're telling her parents today, and they'll decide how to share it with her. Keanu stood motionless, his face a careful mask that revealed nothing of the turmoil beneath. He nodded once, thanked the doctor, and then paused before asking, what would make her remaining time meaningful? Is there something special she's always wanted to do? Dr. Rivera sighed. She talks about the ocean constantly. Wants to see whales and dolphins. Says the sea is where she feels most alive. But with her condition. Keanu entered Ellie's room with the same warm smile as always, the book in hand, giving no indication of what he'd just learned. They finished The Little Prince that day, and when the final page was turned, Ellie looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I love how he goes back to his rose in the end, she said. Even after seeing the whole universe, he goes back to what matters most. Keanu nodded, swallowing hard. What matters most to you, Ellie? He asked softly. Without hesitation, she replied, the ocean. I've only seen it in books and movies. Before I get better, I want to see it for real. Mom and Dad promised to take me, but... She gestured at the medical equipment surrounding her bed. The doctors keep saying not yet. 2 days later, Dr. Harrison Blake, head of pediatric oncology at Massachusetts General Hospital, was reviewing patient files when his assistant knocked on his door. Dr. Blake, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's very insistent. Before she could explain further, a tall, bearded man in simple dark clothing stepped into the office. Dr. Blake recognized him immediately. Mr. Reeves? This is unexpected. Thank you for seeing me, Doctor, Keanu said, taking a seat across from the desk. I'm here about Ellie Matthews. Dr. Blake's expression shifted to one of professional caution. I'm afraid I can't discuss patient information with. I'm not asking for details about her condition, Keanu interrupted gently. Dr. Rivera has already told me what I need to know. I'm here with a proposal. Over the next 30 minutes, Keanu outlined an extraordinary plan, a medically equipped yacht, staffed with doctors and nurses specializing in pediatric oncology, that would take Ellie and her family on a 3-day journey along the Massachusetts coastline to witness marine life in their natural habitat. Every medical contingency would be covered, every expense paid, every detail arranged to ensure Ellie's safety and comfort. This is highly unusual, Dr. Blake said when Keanu finished speaking. There are protocols, liability issues, not to mention the risks to Ellie's already fragile health. I understand, Keanu replied calmly. That's why I've already spoken with 3 medical transport specialists and a maritime safety expert. I have their reports here. He placed a folder on the desk. I'm not asking to remove Ellie from medical care. I'm asking to bring the medical care to her while fulfilling her greatest wish. Dr. Blake studied the man sitting across from him, not the movie star, but the human being whose eyes reflected a depth of understanding about loss that the doctor recognized all too well. Why are you doing this for a child you barely know? He asked quietly. Keanu was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window. Because time is precious, he finally said. And no one knows that better than a child fighting for more of it. After extensive discussions with medical staff, careful planning, and numerous safety precautions, the expedition was approved. Ellie's parents, though initially overwhelmed by the offer, eventually agreed, seeing the joy that sparked in their daughter's eyes when they told her about the trip. The morning of the journey dawned clear and bright, a perfect New England autumn day. A sleek white yacht waited at a private dock, modified to accommodate Ellie's medical needs while still maintaining the appearance of a luxury vessel rather than a floating hospital. Keanu stood on the deck, watching as Ellie arrived in a wheelchair, her face lighting up at the sight of the boat gleaming in the morning sun. Despite her excitement, it was clear the journey from the hospital had exhausted her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her already thin frame seemed to have diminished further in the past weeks. You came, she said when she saw him, her voice barely above a whisper. I promised, didn't I? He replied, kneeling down to her eye level. The ocean awaits, Captain Matthews. The first day at sea passed quietly. Ellie spent most of it resting in a specially prepared cabin, gathering strength. Keanu sat with her, reading from a book about marine mammals, while her parents took turns resting and keeping vigil. "Will we really see whales?" she asked drowsily as the afternoon light began to fade. "If they choose to show themselves," Keanu answered. "The ocean reveals its treasures to those patient enough to wait." On the second morning, Ellie felt stronger. The medical team helped settle her into a comfortable lounge chair on deck, wrapped in blankets against the sea breeze. Keanu sat beside her, pointing out seabirds and explaining how sailors once navigated by the stars. Around midday, the captain reduced the yacht's speed, and a marine biologist who had joined the expedition began scanning the horizon with binoculars. "There's a pod about 2 miles out," she announced after a few minutes. "Humpbacks, at least 5, maybe more." The yacht changed course slightly, moving slowly toward the coordinates she provided. Ellie sat up straighter, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as excitement took over. "Will we get close enough to see them?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "We'll keep a safe distance for both us and them," the biologist explained. "But yes, you'll definitely see them." 20 minutes later, a collective gasp went up from everyone on deck as a massive humpback whale breached the surface less than 100 yards from the yacht, its enormous body arcing through the air before crashing back into the water with a spectacular splash. "Oh my God," Ellie whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's so much bigger than I imagined." Over the next hour, the pod of whales put on a magnificent display, breaching, slapping their tails against the water, and even approaching the yacht close enough that the sound of their exhalations could be clearly heard. Ellie watched it all with rapt attention, occasionally reaching out to squeeze Keanu's hand in silent amazement. "Thank you," she said when the whales finally moved on, her eyes shining with tears. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Keanu smiled, though there was a sadness behind it that he couldn't quite hide. "The day's not over yet," he said. "There's one more surprise after dinner." That evening, as twilight settled over the water, Ellie was brought back on deck to find it transformed. String lights had been hung overhead, creating a canopy of soft illumination that mirrored the emerging stars above. A large screen had been set up, and comfortable seating arranged around it. "What's this?" she asked, looking around in amazement. "A special screening," Keanu explained. "The captain says we need to stay in this area overnight, and I thought you might enjoy a movie under the stars." As Ellie was settled into a nest of cushions and blankets, Keanu nodded to one of the crew members, who started the projector. On the screen appeared not the Hollywood blockbuster Ellie might have expected, but a documentary, specifically produced for this occasion, featuring interviews with leading marine biologists, spectacular underwater footage of ocean life, and even a segment where renowned researchers addressed Ellie directly, answering questions she had mentioned to Keanu during their conversations at the hospital. Halfway through the film, Keanu quietly moved to stand at the railing, gazing out at the dark water. Ellie's mother joined him there, her eyes red from crying. "How can we ever thank you for this?" she asked, her voice breaking. You've given all of us." "No thanks needed," Keanu said softly. "Being here is the privilege." They stood in silence for a moment before Ellie's mother spoke again. "The doctors told us she probably shouldn't have been able to make this trip at all. Her body is so weak. But it's like her spirit is just refusing to give in until she's seen what she came to see." Keanu nodded, understanding perfectly. "The body follows where the heart leads," he said. "Sometimes a dream can be stronger medicine than anything science can provide." The third day dawned with a light mist over the water, giving the world an ethereal quality. Ellie was noticeably weaker, the previous day's excitement having taken a toll on her limited reserves. Still, she insisted on being brought to the deck one more time. "I want to feel the sea air," she explained to the concerned medical team. "Just for a little while." Keanu had arranged one final surprise. As Ellie was settled into her chair, a small, maneuverable boat approached the yacht. On board was Dr. Marina Cortez, one of the world's leading marine mammal specialists, whom Ellie had often mentioned admiring. Dr. Cortez came aboard and spent an hour with Ellie, showing her photographs, answering her questions, and finally presenting her with an official certificate naming her an honorary marine biologist, a title, she explained, that had been approved by her university and several international oceanic research organizations. Your love for the ocean and its creatures is exactly what science needs, Dr. Cortez told her. Curiosity, wonder, and respect for all living things. When it was time to return to shore, Ellie was sleeping peacefully in her cabin. The medical team decided it was best not to wake her for the journey back, monitoring her condition closely as the yacht made its way to port. At the dock, a small crowd had gathered, hospital staff, a few close family friends, and, unexpectedly, several members of the press. Keanu's brow furrowed at the sight of cameras. I specifically requested no media, he said quietly to the yacht's captain. It wasn't us, sir, the captain replied. Someone must have leaked the information. Before Ellie could be brought ashore, a woman in a designer suit pushed her way forward, a cameraman close behind her. Mr. Reeves. Andrea Dawson, Channel 8 News. Can you tell our viewers about this extraordinary gesture for a dying child? Keanu's expression hardened, but before he could respond, a burly security guard, part of the discreet team Keanu had hired, stepped between them. No comments. No footage. This is a private medical transport. The public has a right to know when celebrities use sick children for publicity, the reporter persisted, trying to maneuver around the guard. How much did this photo op cost you, Mr. Reeves? Was it worth? Enough. The sharp voice came from Richard Matthews, Ellie's father, who had emerged from below deck. Though not a large man, his presence suddenly dominated the space, his eyes blazing with a father's protective fury. My daughter is not a story for your ratings, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. She is a human being having a human experience, and you will not turn her suffering, or the profound kindness shown to her, into entertainment. The reporter faltered, clearly not expecting this response. Sir, we're simply trying to highlight. Mr. Reeves has not once, in all of this, sought attention or recognition, Richard continued. He has asked for no publicity, given no interviews, taken no photographs. He has simply showed up, day after day, to bring comfort and joy to a child he met by chance. So before you twist this into something tawdry for your evening broadcast, ask yourself, when was the last time you gave so much expecting nothing in return? A heavy silence fell over the dock. The reporter looked from Richard to Keanu, who stood motionless, his face expressionless save for a quiet sadness in his eyes. We didn't mean to intrude, she finally said, signaling to her cameraman to lower his equipment. We were told this was an approved media opportunity. You were misinformed, Keanu said quietly. Please respect the family's privacy. As the medical team prepared to transfer Ellie to the waiting ambulance, Keanu knelt beside her stretcher for a final goodbye. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. We'll need to continue our marine biology lessons at the hospital, he told her, trying to keep his voice light. Ellie smiled weakly. Did you see them? The whales? Weren't they magnificent? They were, Keanu agreed, taking her small hand in his. Just like you. Will you tell me more about the dolphins next time? She asked, her voice barely audible. Absolutely, he promised, though something in his eyes suggested he knew there might not be a next time. As the ambulance pulled away, Keanu remained on the dock, watching until it disappeared from view. Only then did he notice a young man standing nearby, observing the scene with an intensity that seemed out of place. The man appeared to be in his late 20s, dressed in hospital scrubs under an open jacket, his expression difficult to read. Can I help you? Keanu asked, approaching him. The young man seemed startled, as if not expecting to be noticed. No. Sorry. I should go. You're from the hospital, Keanu observed. Is everything all right with Ellie? The man hesitated, then sighed. My name is Tom Chen. I'm a nurse in the pediatric oncology unit. I've been caring for Ellie for almost 2 years now. He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. I wanted to see for myself. See what? Keanu asked. If you were really like they say. If this was really about Ellie and not about. Tom gestured vaguely, implying the publicity or attention that often accompanied celebrity gestures. Keanu studied him for a moment. And what did you see? Someone who cares, Tom said simply. It's rare, that's all. In my position, you become cynical. You see a lot of promises made to these kids that aren't kept. I keep my promises, Keanu said, his voice quiet but firm. Tom nodded. I can see that now. He hesitated again. There's something else. Something I probably shouldn't tell you, but... Ellie made me promise. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, carefully folded piece of paper. She asked me to give you this if something happened and she couldn't tell you herself. Keanu took the paper, a question in his eyes. She's been working on it for days, in between treatments, Tom explained. Made me promise not to look. Said it was between her and you. 3 days later, the world learned that Ellie Matthews had passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. The news spread quickly through social media, with thousands of people who had never met her expressing condolences and sharing their own experiences with childhood cancer. What no one reported, because no one knew, was that Keanu Reeves sat alone in his hotel room that night, a small folded paper in his hands. He had not opened it yet, honoring the final barrier between Ellie's thoughts and his knowledge of them. But now, in the quiet of the night, he carefully unfolded the note. Inside was a drawing, clearly done by a child's hand, but with remarkable attention to detail. It showed a girl standing on the deck of a boat, looking up at the stars. Beside her stood a tall figure, their hands linked. Below the drawing, in careful letters, were written the words, "Thank you for showing me that the most beautiful journeys aren't about the destination. They're about who walks beside you along the way." Keanu sat motionless, the paper trembling slightly in his grasp, as tears he had not allowed himself to shed finally came. 6 months later, at the annual fundraising gala for Children's Hospital, an unexpected announcement was made. A new marine biology education program would be launched for young patients, bringing the wonder of the ocean to children too ill to travel. The initiative would include virtual reality experiences, visits from marine scientists, and for those well enough, supervised excursions to aquariums and coastal research stations. The program was to be called Ellie's Ocean, funded by an anonymous donation of $10 million. Speculation ran rampant about the identity of the donor, but hospital officials maintained that strict confidentiality had been requested and would be honored. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that the paperwork establishing the endowment had been delivered by messenger, accompanied by a simple note that read, "For the dreamers who know the sea holds magic. May they all find their whales." What no one outside the hospital knew was that there was a second condition attached to the donation. Tom Chen, the nurse who had been so devoted to Ellie's care, was to be offered the position of program coordinator, with his medical training fully funded should he choose to pursue advanced study in pediatric care. 1 year to the day after Ellie's ocean journey, a small gathering took place on the same stretch of coastline where the whales had been spotted. Ellie's parents, Tom Chen, and a few of the medical staff who had cared for her stood in a loose circle as the sun began to set. Richard Matthews held a small urn, his wife's hand resting on his arm for support. "She loved this place more than anywhere on earth," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Even though she only saw it once. As they prepared to scatter Ellie's ashes on the water, a figure approached from further down the beach, a man walking alone, his long coat billowing slightly in the breeze. Keanu stopped at a respectful distance, uncertain of his welcome at such an intimate moment. Sarah Matthews noticed him first and, without hesitation, walked over and took his hand. "You should be here," she said simply, leading him to join the circle. No speeches were made as Ellie's ashes were released to the wind and waves. No platitudes were offered about her being in a better place. There was only the sound of the sea, the cry of distant gulls, and the shared understanding of lives that had briefly intersected because of one remarkable child. As twilight deepened into dusk, something extraordinary happened. A flash of movement in the water caught their attention, a dorsal fin, then another, cutting through the waves not 50 yards offshore. "Dolphins," Tom said in disbelief. "A whole pod of them." For nearly 20 minutes, the dolphins played in the fading light, leaping and diving as if performing for the small group on shore. It was, all agreed later, either an astonishing coincidence or something that defied rational explanation, a moment when the boundary between the world as we understand it and something more mysterious seemed to blur. Eventually, the dolphins moved on, disappearing into the gathering darkness. The group on shore began to disperse, exchanging quiet hugs and promises to stay in touch. Keanu was the last to leave, standing at the water's edge long after the others had gone. From his pocket, he took a familiar piece of paper, Ellie's drawing, now protected in a clear waterproof case. He looked at it one more time in the fading light, then carefully secured it back in his pocket, close to his heart. "Goodbye, Ellie," he said softly to the waves. "Thank you for showing me what really matters." As he turned to walk away, a sudden splash made him look back. There, silhouetted against the darkening sky, a single dolphin leapt high above the waves, a perfect arc of grace and freedom, before disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Keanu stood motionless for a long moment, then smiled, a smile of understanding, of acceptance, of a grief that would never fully heal but would, with time, transform into something beautiful. He walked back up the beach alone, a solitary figure against the vast horizon. To casual observers, he might have appeared to be just another beachgoer heading home at day's end. But to those who knew the story, the doctors, nurses, and family members whose lives had been touched by his quiet kindness, he was something else entirely. Not a movie star, not a celebrity, but simply a human being who understood that the measure of a life well lived isn't found in fame or fortune, but in the moments when we choose to walk beside those who are suffering, to share their burdens, and to help them find beauty even in the darkest of times. In the years that followed, Ellie's Ocean would grow to become one of the most successful therapeutic programs in pediatric oncology, eventually expanding to children's hospitals across the country. Thousands of young patients would experience the wonder of the sea through its resources, and many would find not just distraction from their pain, but purpose and meaning in the midst of their struggles. And occasionally, very occasionally, children in the program would mention a special visitor, a kind man with long dark hair and sad eyes who would sit with them, read to them, and listen to their dreams with the full attention of someone who understood that every moment is precious. Hospital staff would smile knowingly but say nothing. Some stories, they knew, belong not to the world, but to the hearts of those who have lived them. Some journeys are private, their meaning measured not in miles traveled but in lives touched. And some heroes, the real ones, walk among us unrecognized, asking nothing in return for their kindness except the knowledge that, for a brief moment in time, they helped make someone else's journey a little less lonely, a little more beautiful, and infinitely more meaningful. In the end, isn't that the greatest role any of us can hope to play? As our story comes to a close, we can't help but wonder, what other acts of kindness has Keanu Reeves performed that the world may never know about? What touches you most about this story? Is it his selflessness, his understanding of what truly matters in life, or the profound impact one person can have when they choose compassion over celebrity? The tale of Keanu and Ellie reminds us that true heroism isn't found on movie screens, but in the quiet moments when no cameras are rolling. It's in the choice to be present for someone in need, to make their journey a little brighter despite knowing the destination cannot be changed. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you see Keanu Reeves in a new light, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What small act of kindness have you witnessed that changed someone's life? How has kindness from a stranger impacted your own journey? Share your stories in the comments below. Let us know if you'd like to hear more real-life tales of compassion from Hollywood's most humble star. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the goodness that exists in our world. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't fiction, they're the quiet moments of human connection that happen every day, all around us, when someone chooses to be the light in another person's darkness. Before you go, take a moment to look around you. Is there an Ellie in your life who needs someone to walk beside them, if only for a little while? Remember, it costs nothing to be kind, but to someone fighting their own private battle, your kindness might be everything.